What happened to Keith? Imagine being condemned to die for a crime you didn't commit. That's the story of Keith LaMar, a death row prisoner in Ohio who has spent more than 30 years confined in solitary confinement, fighting to prove his innocence. His execution is scheduled for January 13, 2027, a date that looms like a deadline for justice itself. Keith's case goes to the heart of the American justice system, exposing its flaws, its biases, and its devastating human cost. His is not just a story of wrongful conviction, it's a story of resilience, hope, and the fight for truth in the face of insurmountable odds. Keith LaMar's case compels us to ask, if this could happen to him, who among us is truly safe from injustice? In 1993, the Lucasville prison in Ohio became the epicenter of one of the deadliest prison uprisings in U.S. history. Rioting prisoners took control of the facility for 11 days. By the time the dust had settled, the chaos left 11 people dead, 10 prisoners and 1 guard. Faced with immense pressure from the public and the media, Ohio's authorities scrambled for answers. They needed scapegoats, ones who could bear the burden of accountability for the deaths during the uprising. And soon, Keith LaMar, already serving prison time, found himself labeled as one of the culprits in this tragedy. But was he responsible? Did the justice system genuinely uncover the truth, or did it simply satisfy a demand for swift retribution? Keith LaMar never had an easy path in life. By the time of the uprising, he was already incarcerated at Lucasville. But nothing could prepare him for the storm of accusations that followed. Keith wasn't a ringleader of the uprising. He wasn't implicated through any physical evidence. Yet the state of Ohio zeroed in on him, accusing him of orchestrating and committing multiple murders during the riot. The charge carried one of the gravest sentences possible: death. Why was Keith targeted? The answer may lie in a narrative desperate for closure, even at the cost of the truth. Keith's day in court should have been a chance to prove his innocence, but the odds were stacked against him. Witnesses who testified against him were incentivized, promised reduced sentences or other benefits in exchange for statements implicating Keith. Critical evidence that could have exonerated him was either ignored or suppressed. Most damning of all, there was no physical evidence tying Keith to the murders. Nothing but a trial weighed down by bias, haste, and desperation to deliver convictions. In the end, the death sentence was imposed, and Keith was sent to death row, his voice crying out amid a sea of injustices. Since his sentencing, Keith LaMar has endured over 3 decades of solitary confinement. That's more than 30 years of near-total isolation. He spends 23 hours a day alone in a small concrete cell. He hasn't touched another human being in decades, and his interactions with others are rare and fleeting. The psychological and emotional toll of such confinement is unimaginable. Experts liken it to torture. Yet Keith has not let the walls of his cell strip him of his hope. Against all odds, he has continued to articulate his truth, write about his experiences, and fight back against an unjust system, all while locked away from the outside world. Throughout these decades, Keith has maintained one unshakable claim: he is innocent. He has spoken publicly about the lack of evidence and the flawed testimonies that led to his conviction. He has pointed to the systemic issues that made him a convenient target rather than a justly judged man. Keith's story isn't just about one person. It's about how an entire system can fail. And for Keith, the stakes are as high as they get. If a fair examination of his case isn't conducted, his execution will happen in less than 4 years. Keith's case shines a light on some of the darkest corners of the American justice system. The Lucasville trials, fueled by public pressure for quick answers, revealed how rushed investigations and coerced testimonies can derail the pursuit of truth. Prosecutorial misconduct, racial bias, and a lack of resources for effective defense played central roles in Keith's conviction. How many others like Keith have been caught in this flawed machinery over the years? His story illustrates that it's not enough to call for accountability. We must demand fairness, clarity, and integrity in every case, because until we do, what happened to Keith will happen again. Key pieces of evidence that could have exonerated Keith were ignored during his original trial. Advocates have since brought these inconsistencies to light, yet they have faced insurmountable barriers in getting the courts to revisit his conviction. Among these revelations are claims that witnesses lied under pressure, that evidence was buried, and that state officials were more interested in closing the case than investigating the truth. Every new piece of evidence raises the same haunting question: could the system sacrifice an innocent man to preserve an illusion of justice? As Keith fights for his life, his case forces us to confront a broader truth. Wrongful convictions are not rare. They devastate individuals, families, and communities. They erode trust in the legal system and leave a scar on the soul of our society. Keith's case doesn't just hold meaning for him, it reverberates for everyone who believes in justice. His fight is a fight to ensure that the system we hold sacred doesn't turn on the people it was designed to protect. If you haven't heard Keith LaMar's story before, it's not your fault. His case hasn't received the media coverage it desperately needs. The lack of sustained attention has allowed the state of Ohio to move forward towards his execution with minimal public scrutiny. Media attention saves lives. It has done so for other individuals on death row, shining a spotlight on flawed convictions and rallying public support for justice. Keith's story needs the same urgency before it's too late. It's easy to forget that behind headlines and prison walls is a man. Keith LaMar is not a statistic or a caricature. He's a human being with passion, creativity, and empathy. Keith has poured his soul into writing from death row, expressing the depths of his thoughts, fears, and dreams. Through his art and his words, Keith reminds us that someone's humanity does not disappear because they're labeled guilty in a courtroom or buried in a cell. His life is proof that even in the darkest places, light can endure. Communities across the nation are rallying for Keith. Civil rights organizations, legal advocates, and everyday people are amplifying his cause, protesting his execution, and calling for a fair reevaluation of his case. His supporters speak not just about his innocence, but about his character, painting a portrait of a man who remains resilient despite unimaginable hardship. Their voices are growing louder, but they need more people to join in. Keith's scheduled execution forces us to reflect on broader questions. What kind of justice system do we want? How can we prevent more wrongful convictions? And what are we willing to do to stop Keith LaMar's fate from becoming a tragic reality? Keith cannot win this fight alone. Every signature on a petition, every call to an official, every shared story of his plight brings him closer to hope. It's up to all of us to demand justice. Not just for Keith, but for everyone at risk of being silenced by a broken system. True crime isn't just about fascination with stories, it's about uncovering the truth. Let's tell Keith LaMar's story. Let's fight for his life.